What is the most traumatizing thing you saw as a kid? Not safe for work? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. When I was 5, I woke up hearing my mom screaming like the world ended. I got up and ran to my parents' bedroom. I saw my mom screaming and crying in a bed covered in blood. I saw my dad projectile vomiting blood. Blood was also coming out of his nose. I remember hearing my mom asking him to please wake up. She was trying to open his eyes. I don't know for how long I've been watching this situation, but I remember my older sister calling me into her bedroom away from this very traumatizing situation. I remember my dog going crazy when he heard the ambulances and when the first responders came in. My dad died later in the hospital. We still don't know exactly what caused this. We do know that my dad had a cerebral hemorrhage and organ failure due to an extreme loss of blood. I'm 27 years old right now, and this still has me fucked up. I was walking to school on the same path as a teacher and my family friend. She was just in front of me when her ex-boyfriend runs up, shoots her in the head, and then himself. He survived. She didn't. This was right in front of the connected high school. The entire school was sent home for the day, but I was a second grader, 7 years old, and it really messed me up. My mother was sick throughout my childhood. I remember when I was a small child, I found her naked in bed, dead. I remember trying to wake her, checking her pulse, nothing. I refused to cry because I thought that was brave, and I rummaged through her wallet because I thought I would need money to survive. When I went to school the next day, I resolved to tell nobody because I was afraid of their pity. My friend who stayed over that tragic night had already told people though. Even my bully was sorry about the situation. I remember being young, probably 7-ish. My mom went into a seizure. She has epilepsy and dropped to the ground in our living room foaming from her mouth. My dad literally just stepped over her like she was nothing but trash and left. I've never seen someone treat a human so coldly. It's the reason why I now work in healthcare. Looking back now, it's probably as a 6-year-old watching a car hit my 3-year-old brother and send him flying into the air and splat down onto the road and everyone screaming. I particularly remember the fear and pain in my dad's voice screaming, "No!" Weirdly, all I don't really remember feeling any emotions at the time, but I do remember thinking, why is everyone saying he's been run over when I clearly saw him flying into the air? Looking back, I can see that the incident did affect me, but maybe as a 6-year-old I was too young to realize at the time. My brother survived, by the way. He was in hospital for months with broken legs and pelvis, but completely recovered. Good. When I was about 5 years old, my dad, my brother, and I were walking along the Mississippi River in southern Missouri. My dad suddenly started telling us we needed to go home right away, but my brother and I wanted to stay longer. But then I saw what my father was looking at, a dead body. A man probably about 25 to 30 years old sitting on the ground, his back against a tree, and what looked like black vomit down his shirt. The body was purple and bloated. The tongue stuck out of his mouth a bit. It didn't traumatize me at the time, not realizing what was going on, but it did a few years later when I was old enough to understand what I saw. Junkie brother freaking the F out after being locked out of the house. You'd be surprised how much it still hurts, even if your sibling stabbed you in the back over and over, stealing money from the family, asking you, a 14-year-old, for cash that you usually use for lunch. Even if all that, it still hurts you emotionally at the very core to hear them so lost, to hear them sobbing, to hear that they have nowhere to go, to hear that they're so sorry and would do anything to make it right. It's also terrifying to hear them demolish property outside, to scream, to be an animal unhinged, driven by a basic need for more of a substance. You know it's the right thing that has to be done, but it's difficult, even more so when you have to convince your own mom she did the right thing. When I was 4 and my mom was coming to pick me up from my dad's house, split custody after divorce, his new wife nearly beat my mom to death on the front lawn with a wireless landline phone, all the while yelling into the phone with 911 saying she was being attacked. I was in my mom's Mustang with the child locks on, couldn't get out to do anything, just screaming to please not kill my mom. My dad wasn't even there. He was a doctor and always at work until evening. My mom ended up going to jail for trespassing, despite her face being beat to a purple mess, while the new, soon-to-be stepmom didn't have a scratch on her. My dad never believed me, ended up marrying the woman. We've never had a relationship since. Damn. I was 13 when I found my best friend dead from suicide. Worst part about it was the people who pushed her to that point were laughing about it for a long time. My mom let me get a tattoo with my best friend's name in a heart, but that's a sight I won't ever forget. Witnessed an early morning solo car accident where the car split in half and the person was ejected. Out of fear of an explosion, I didn't get too close to the car or person, who was dead at that point. The next day, I found out that person was an acquaintance and had the locker immediately next to mine in high school. I was wandering around the biology building, and I came to the room where they kept animals and body parts preserved in ethanol, which I thought was kinda cool, way reptiles and stuff. I was a kid after all. I look up to see one top shelf with an elongated head, teardrop eyes, gray skin, and 4 long fingers on each hand. I ran very nervous to tell my mother I'd found an alien. She came back and had the unfortunate task of explaining to me that it was actually a human fetus with severe mutations. Massive car crash in front of my lawn. Ran outside and immediately saw a bloody body laying on the side of my neighbor's fence. Couldn't tell if it was male or female because of all the blood and long hair. Not sure how another friend found out before I did, as it happened right outside, but turns out that it was my high school friend. He was crossing the street and was killed on impact. My own face gashed open. When I was younger, I tripped going full speed down a parking lot concrete hill and completely smashed my face and head. It was full of dirt, rocks, glass, etc. It also was a poorly done parking lot hill. I didn't feel a thing at first, but I touched my face and my hands were coated red. I guess I had too much shock and adrenaline to feel anything, but of course, seeing so much blood as a child, I screamed and cried and almost passed out. I did run into the bathroom when I ran into my house before heading to the hospital. I remember looking at myself and seeing my face basically ripping apart. My nose was split wide open, forehead completely scraped off, lip busted open. Scared me for life seeing my own face like that. My mom getting her leg snapped and broken in a fight with one of her druggy boyfriends. I can never forget the sound. I was 7. I can still hear it. Or maybe my mom getting cornered by another boyfriend and his 17-year-old son, kicking her so hard she couldn't even scream and pissed everywhere. Then rubbed her face in it. I was 9, and I was mad at myself for years for not having the strength to get the steak knife I would hide under my pillowcase if I had to save my mom. My dad pushed my mom through a glass door. She tried to catch herself, but her arms went through the panels and she instinctively pulled her arms back through, blood everywhere. You could see her flesh hanging from broken glass still left on the door. Totally thought I was watching my mom bleed out. She went into shock almost immediately. She kept saying, "I'm fine, this is going to be fine." My dad didn't even call an ambulance. He was more worried about getting blood on his new car. Over 1,000 plus, they stopped counting stitches, and she's fine today. The tops of her arms looked like she was mauled by a bear with all the scars. My cousin and I were 6 years old, and we were outside playing. Her mom was handling a rifle, and it misfired and hit her on the back of the head. She died instantly, and I saw it all. She was alive 1 second and dead the next, and it easily could have been me. My aunt was never the same and ended up letting diabetes kill her years later. My cousin's sister was 1 at the time, so she used to ask me a lot growing up what her sister was like. The only solace I have is that her organs were donated, so there are a couple of people walking around alive nowadays with a remnant of her alive as well. I am in therapy and finally addressing this, but I still shake when I talk about her, and I'm 33 now. Rest in peace, Sarah. I miss you. I think the most traumatizing thing I saw, I've seen a lot, was when I was 4 or 3 and my dad hit me because I tried to hug him. I had a big hand-shaped bruise for weeks after, but the hitting wasn't the traumatizing part. The traumatizing part was that my mom was in such shock that she screamed at my dad and he wasn't really happy about that, so I had to sit on the other side of the room and watch my mom get beaten up for 15 minutes. I was lucky to only get hit once because I know that he has more kids, and I know that multiple of them have ended up in hospital. When I was about 7, I saw a man fall down an escalator and crack his head open. There was so much blood everywhere, and for years I thought he died and refused to use escalators. If I was forced onto an escalator, I'd end up having a panic attack, or I'd be so scared that it took me 10 minutes just to put my foot on one. My mom told me a few years ago that he didn't die. He had just badly cut his head and passed out because once the ambulance got there, he came to and went to the hospital to get stitches. She actually felt really bad because I had never told her that I thought he had died. She just figured seeing the guy fall was the only reason for my fear of escalators. As an adult, I'd still rather take the stairs or a lift, but I don't mind getting on escalators too. One lunchtime in first grade, there were some boys in my class who were standing on wooden benches. They came up with the game where they'd take turns jumping over the decently sized gap between the benches. These benches happened to have metal legs. One of the boys misjudged the gap, and his leg hit the metal hard. I don't know, can't remember how exactly it happened because I was only like 5, but the metal gouged out a huge bone deep wound in his shin. I can still remember his screams, the brightness of the blood as it gushed over the concrete, and marveling at how white bones actually are. In high school, I was waiting for the light to change to cross a busy road when a kid ran past me into traffic and was hit by a speeding car. I didn't hear the impact with the car, I only became aware of him when he was pinwheeling 30 feet through the air. Then he landed right on his head with a sickening crunch like a mixture of biting fresh celery and hitting a punching bag. I ran up to him, knelt down beside him, and sort of cradled his head in lap. He was bleeding profusely from all over his head. It was just pouring out and pooling around us. I remember it was sticky under my feet. I knew of him, but not his name. He was a popular kid on the football team and a grade ahead of me. He had piercing blue eyes that looked up at me with a mixture of shock and confusion. His eyes faded to pale blue and then to gray as the life slowly leaked out of him. He was trying to speak, but when he opened his mouth, bright red blood spurted and leaked out instead. The kid died in my arms in less than a minute. When the EMTs picked him up to put him on the gurney, a flap in the back of his head opened and all of his brains fell out. I was covered in this kid's blood and freaking out, but after taking my statement, the cops just told me I should go home. As I walked away, I saw his white Converse tennis shoes still in the crosswalk, one perfect step apart, laces still tied, not even knocked over. I've never owned white shoes in my entire life. 15 years later, I'm watching Star Trek: The Next Generation with my wife one evening. There's a scene where LaForge opens a flap in Data's head in order to perform a diagnostic. Out of the blue, I lost my shit, started bawling and couldn't stop, scared the shit out of my wife. After a great deal of therapy, we realized I had never dealt with the trauma of that event. If I close my eyes, I can still see him pinwheeling through the air and hear the sickening crunch of that kid's head splitting open on the pavement.